your presence is so natural. But did you have any training? Because you obviously came in through chance. You got into the theatre because you saw an opportunity. But you're not a trained actor from the beginning, and yet there you are, so natural on screen.
Well, I suppose by then, yes. I mean, had been in theatre for at least 8 years. You might know that. Before I got in my first film, Pool of London.
Yeah.
So I had a very good teacher, a lady, Amanda Ivor Aldrich. You ever heard of her?
The granddaughter of
the great Ivor
Aldrich, whose
right.
life story was turned into the play Red Velvet recently.
Yeah. Well, I had the absolute honor and privilege to work with her. And of course, some of the talent might have rubbed off a little bit on me. But yeah, I think and then I had another good teacher, Iris Ward. Did you ever hear of her? For voice training mainly. And Cicely Barry, you've heard of her, of course. Yeah. Well, yeah, these are the people I worked with. So I had some degree of training, but I never went to a dramatic arts school. I never had that opportunity.
And Pool of London, your first screen role, how did that come about?
That's a good question. Well, I was in a terrible show in the West End called 13 Death Street, Harlem. The film was as bad as the title, I would say, or the play. I mean, it was bad. Terrible. I wasn't happy in it at all. And I would have given anything to get out of it. But the rent has to be paid. So the show was doing very well. It was quite successful. And then I got the opportunity to be in Pool of London, my first film. And that came about almost by accident, really. I phoned up Ealing Studios to inquire about another film called Where No Vultures Fly. And Margaret Harper Nelson, the casting director, said, well, we're not doing that until November. I said, now, wait a minute, what did you say your name is again? I said, Earl Cameron. She said, oh, yes, you sent your picture in Spotlight. Said, by the way, we are casting for a film. And could you see Bessel Gidden this afternoon, she said. I said, of course. No, right now, if you like. So, well, we met at Denham Studios. He was there doing some music for a film with Gene Simmons. And we met, and he talked with me and said, well, Earl, I don't know anything about you, but I brought some clippings with me. He looked at them, read them. They look pretty good. It's from a play called Deep Are the Roots that I was in. And he said, by the way, how old are you? I said, 26. I was 32 at the time. Well, what can you do, you know?
Nothing's changed.
Yeah, right. I mean, he had told me a little about the story at the time, so naturally I knew it was a much younger person than me, than the character was much younger. So he said, you look older. I said, yeah, maybe it's my mustache. Yeah, it could be. So he said, would you like to shave it off? I said, right now, if you like. However, I tested, several tests I had, about 3 tests. I remember, am I talking too much?
No.
Okay.
No.
I don't want to bore anybody here.
You're not boring anybody, believe
Right.
me.
So we, because as I said, I'd been in the theater for about 8 years. I'd been used to projecting. So we had a film test, and I remember the lines it was on London Bridge late at night about 12 o'clock, and the line was something like this happened the last the first time I met Danny. So he said, okay, Earl, action. Yeah, something like this happened the first time. He said, Earl, the camera's right here. The mic's just above you. It's late at night, about 12 o'clock. Bring it down. So I said, okay. Yeah, he said, okay, action. Yeah, Earl, you're too loud. Look, it's quiet at night. And I tested with 3 different girls. I couldn't get it right. Well, for 2 girls. Then the third time, he said, okay, Earl, let's try it again. He said, okay, action. Yeah. Same thing happened the first time I met Danny. Earl, you got it. That's it. And from that moment on, believe me, I'd become a film actor.
You just knew it.
I had never worried about projection.
We're going to watch that scene later, then we'll see it happen. What was it like on set on your first film? Because I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it's such an amazing snapshot of London in 1950 with the rubble of the war still there. I wonder what the film industry was like for an actor like you on your first role.
Well, I would say that, generally speaking, my first day at Ealing Studios, I found that everybody was so courteous and kind, and the second assistant met me, took me up to my dressing room. He said, now, Earl, would you like a coffee or tea or something? Coffee, cheese roll, anything? I think I had a coffee. Speaking of coffee. And so that was the attitude in the studio. When I've been on the set for the first time, everybody, hi Earl, how you doing? That sort of quality. So it was so different from the theater, because the theater, you go to the studio, go to the theater at night, nobody there to meet you. Naturally, I mean, you're in a play. And you don't have anybody to bring you a coffee or tea or anything like that. So the studios were, people were respectful, I would say, and I enjoyed that. Not that I found the theater also was good. I can't say I've met with any kind of slights or anything in my career as an actor among the people I worked with, apart from some silly little individual, but generally speaking, no. Everybody's always been very kind.
Was there a gap, though? My mother came to Britain in the late 1950s, and she always said there was such a gap between how you got treated inside broadcasting or inside the world of acting and how things could be as an actor of colour, as a person of colour on the streets. Was that a difference you noticed?
Well, racial prejudice has never bothered me. To me, I think if somebody is stupid enough to make some distinction between himself and me, I mean, he happens to be white, that's his problem, not mine. I couldn't care less about it. Apart from when I don't want to bore anybody here, but I have one or two little stories to tell. It might be boring to you. But when I first came to London, I would say clearly, I met with many slights and prejudices, but it doesn't bother me. But what did bother me was when I tried to get a job. That was an impossibility. And I mean impossibility. One might not realize this. But it was very hard in 1939 when I first came to London for a black person to get a job anywhere, any kind of job. Really, I'm telling you this. This is history. And it's good for people to know this, but London, socially, people were okay. As long as you were nicely dressed, you had money in your pocket, people were friendly. But when they came to getting a job, that was a big difference. And I had been in London for about maybe 6 months before I got just a a type of job that normally I would not have thought of doing in Bermuda, but I was in England, had no profession, and I was broke and hungry. And one day on Charing Cross Road, I met a guy from Jamaica, and he said, "Hey, man, you want a job?" I said, "You kidding?" He said, No, I'm serious." He said, "Yeah, he told me I should go to a place in near Tottenham Court Road. Anyhow, I went to this address, and they looked me up and down, this guy, and it was an agency, domestic agency. So he said, well, Charing Cross Hotel needs a dishwasher. He gave me a note. I went there, met a little short Frenchman, and he was rather reluctant, I must admit. But he said, "I can give you a job for 5 days." For me, 2 hours would have been enough just to get near the kitchen and get something good food to eat. I'm serious about this. That's the way life was with me. I had a terrible, terrible winter. However, I got the job, and it unfortunately happened after the 5 days was up, and then he said, "I've decided to keep you on, Cameron." And then he said, "I'm from France. And in France, people are somewhat different from in your country," as he thought. My country was Bermuda. So he said, "But anyhow, I decided that I'll keep you on." And so he gave me the job. I was there, washing dishes, quite happy. Then came one cold day in March. I came out with a green sweater I'd been wearing all winter and my Mac that I bought when I first came to London. I was always nicely dressed, decently dressed, let's put it that way. I must say nice, decently dressed. So I went to work this day without my sweater, with my coat, because it was a pretty sunny day in March. Came out of the kitchen that evening and got a chill because I didn't have my coat and sweater. And the weather had turned, how it is in England. Sometimes about March, you get a hot day. In Bermuda, when the sun comes in March, May, it means warm weather for the rest of the season. But in England, it could be here a temperature at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and could drop about 10 degrees at night. And this is what happened. So I caught a bad chill. And I went back to work the next morning rather stupidly. And the head waiter said, "Look, Cameron, you're not looking well. You look rather ill." And I was sweating. He said, I should go home, go back home. "Don't worry, your job will be here when you get better." Well, I went back to my digs in Whitfield Street, and I went up to my room, and then a lady came up and says, "Cameron, you're not looking well." I was perspiring. And so she said, "I think I better call my doctor." I said, "Okay." I don't know. I said, I'm going to be all right, don't worry." She said, No, you're not well." She called the doctor, Italian doctor came, and he took my temperature. I had 104 temperature, I believe he said. says I called an ambulance straight away, and they put me into Charing Cross and St. Pancras Hospital.
How long before you came out? What happened to your job?
Well, it's a long story. I think
I know. Well, I'm worried because we want to talk about your films as well, but I want to know what happened when you came back.
You see, I should have said, if I get there, I ramble on.
No, but you know, it's an insight into what you've lived through. And you have this film, Pool of London, which changes your life and changes your career, but you have the memory of those hard years, which is really important to hear. Did you get the job back, or was that the end of it when you recovered?
No, it wasn't the end of it, no. Well, I see, that's what I'm trying to say. I was going to tell you about it. Never mind.
I'll tell you what, if we have time at the end, we'll bring it back up, but I want to talk some more about your films. But thank you for that insight.
I understand.
After Pool of London came out, as anyone who hasn't seen it will see once they've seen it, you got the most amazing reviews. And it seems obvious looking at it that you should have been up for major leading roles. That didn't happen. What did happen? What sense did you get of
Well,
what
to be
was going
very
to happen?
honest, I got very good notices from the film. Leading people like Lejeune, that was then a writer for the critic for the Observer, one of the best papers, Sunday papers. And even in New York, I got good notices. But it would be at least 6 months before I got out of the park, unfortunately. So then I was in a terrible film, just a small part, with Lawrence Harvey, I remember, and Susan Shaw, strange enough, was in the same part.
Which film was
directed
that?
by Lewis Gilbert. It was called, I forget the name of it.
I bet
now.
someone here will know.
I'm sorry.
What was it?
My memory is Wall of Death. That's
There you
right.
go.
Wall of Death. That's it. Yeah.
But I'd read you say that you were quite careful in roles you took, that a lot of black actors at the time were being offered villain parts or quite racially stereotyped parts, and that you turned stuff down. I'm interested in the other roles that you did take, because there's films like Simba about the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya,
Right.
which you play a sympathetic part, but they're difficult films to watch now. How did you choose the roles that you did take in those years?
Well, I can't remember ever being offered a part that I didn't accept. But I can remember changing the script with directors sometimes. Lines and so on that I thought was a bit racially
Can you give
insulting.
an example?
Pardon?
Have you got an example of lines you changed in a film?
Oh, good. That's a good question. It's too long ago. I
Okay.
can't-
Or even,
but
can you remember a film?
Many times we would have a chat
Yeah.
with the script. Well, I remember Roy Baker, who I was in Flame in the Streets, one of the films. We had a long chat about the script. And he changed certain things, which I thought was racially insulting. But generally speaking, I was, for the most part of my career, I'll be very honest, the most part of my career, I was never, ever in a position to turn a part down. I was too happy to get whatever came along. But life was expensive living. I had 5 of my children in lycée français, high, big school fees and other expenses. So I did an awful lot of films, a lot of small parts that normally I wouldn't have taken if I wasn't so broke. But I was too happy to get them.
And they are often very important parts. I mean, like in Sapphire, where, again, rather like Pool of London, you're sort of the moral centre of the film, and you show up other people's prejudices. Those may not be, it wasn't a huge part, but it was a very important part.
Oh, yes. Films like Sapphire, Simba, and were bigger parts, because a lot of them were small parts, but we'd have chats always with the director. And I directed with Basil Dearden before, so, and also, I was, all respects to Basil Dearden and Michael Ralph, yes, producer. They were very, I might say, broad-minded people who was very careful never to write something that would be degrading for a black person, as I say.
Joan Hooley, who we saw in that documentary clip, she had an interracial romance in Emergency Ward 10. She was speaking very highly of you. But I know she's spoken about how after that storyline that she was in, there was a backlash from audiences and she got written out very quickly from the series. I wondered how far at the time these supposedly groundbreaking dramas about race, how far they felt groundbreaking to actors like you.
Speaking of Emergency Call, that was a delightful part, which I welcomed very much. It wasn't a big budget film. And to be honest, I only had 3 days on the film. But it was the type of part I liked playing. It was about race again. A lot of them filmed parts those days were always brought on the race question. And, well, what can I say? Emergency Call. You've seen the film, have you?
But this is Emergency Call.
You
I haven't
Emergency
seen
Call,
that
did
one,
you?
no.
Yeah.
But you didn't mind that so often actors like you were used in films that were about racism. Was that frustrating at all?
Frustration?
Yeah.
In what way do you mean?
That instead of just being a film where you had a strong role, there had to be a racial theme to it, like Flame in the Streets or Sapphire. That the message for the audiences was about race in some way.
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah, it didn't bother you.
No.
It was work.
No, I mean, I've played some villains in films, not many, most have been sympathetic roles, but to me, as long as it's about life and it's honest, it's true, I accept it. If it's false, if it's something that I think would not happen, I would either have a chat with the director to change it or turn the part down, you know. Yes, there are times when I've said, no, I'm sorry, I don't want this. Naturally. I think I reacted at some time or other.
I want to talk about television because although you did have those film roles starting from Pool of London, from the late 50s, as we saw in that clip there, you started to get major roles in television, which was a very interesting time. And we have a few more clips of ones you've been in. And I should flag up before we show it. The second of the clips is an extract from an Edward Albee play, The Death of Bessie Smith, which is based on the misunderstanding that she had died after being turned away from a white hospital in Mississippi. It has very strong racial language. You might spot someone quite familiar as one of your co-stars in it. Shall we play them? It's tough watching even now, isn't it? How was it to perform? Because these plays were done, sometimes, was this done live or recorded in one take?
No, it was recorded. No, not live. There's only one play I've been in that was live. That was some year, the very beginning of television, actually. A thing called The End Begins.
But the intensity of these TV plays, performing them, what was it like? Because it's not theatre, and yet it's not quite regular TV drama, is it, as we know it now?
You know, it's the first time I've seen this, and I think I was pretty good.
You were damn good. The earlier one we saw with Stanley Baker, A Fear of Strangers, that had been written in 1958, and it was 6 years later it got made, apparently because executives were worried about the content of it, the racist language, and the portrayal of the police as racist.
Really?
Did you feel at the time that you were breaking new ground with many of these dramas and films?
I never thought of it like that, no. To me, it was just another very good part, but I never thought it's breaking ground as such.
I also wondered about some of the kind of TV roles you did in long-running series. And actually, the Thunderball as well, the Bond film, there's something about having small parts in cult films that seems to matter. And you were in the Doctor Who adventure, The 10th Planet, which was William Hartnell's last story. And I gather that writer Derek Martinus originally wrote that part as Welsh, but you played it. Do you remember much about being cast in Doctor Who?
I recall that William Hartnell did not think it was a good idea to have a black, what do you call them?
Astronauts.
Astronaut, yeah. Yes, I remember, I believe that, but I think the director just ignored that. But if I recall, I discovered that after I did the part, after the production.
So the writer and the director had stood up for you. Because also, you're in the single best episode of The Prisoner, I think, The Schizoid Man. You're the supervisor of the brainwash experiment. And although you'd worked with Patrick McGoohan before on things like Danger Man and you'd been in theatre together, I gather again he thought, the part shouldn't have gone to you. And that it was, again, the script editor, George Markstein, who made sure you got the part.
George Markstein, very fine man, yeah.
But it's interesting, this idea that a black actor in science fiction or fantasy writing somehow isn't right, and that...
Well, I think from Patrick McGoohan's point of view, the type of story he wrote, he was very much responsible for that whole series, as you might know, the writing of it. He felt that in this sort of strange area, there wouldn't have any black people there. So he thought it wouldn't be true to the story, I think. That's from his point of view. It couldn't be anything else, because I'd worked with him in the theater. I did about 4 Danger Man series with him. So he knew I was very capable of playing. It wasn't a difficult part anyhow. Yeah. But I think it was only that he felt it would not fit with the type of thing he was saying. But you know, he was mistaken about that. Because you might not know this, but during the war, I mean, it was about that type of thing, wasn't it? During the war in Germany, Hitler had a fair amount of black people as spies, you know, private. So,
right.
And even in Amsterdam, there was a black, what they call it? Well, in the Gestapo, I guess, you know, one of the top men was black. In Amsterdam, believe it or not, during the war.
There's the whole other film there, I think, that we should be making.
Yeah, so in his story, he felt that black people wouldn't appear in that type of thing, but it didn't matter.
No, and crucially, I was thinking Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura, was here exactly 2 weeks ago, and she remembers how Martin Luther King said to her, even a small part, but in an important piece of television is so important. And you've been in so many of these parts, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller,
right.
But a presence all the way through these decades. Have younger actors come up and told you about your influence on them, or younger filmmakers?
I'm sorry.
I wondered how far younger actors have acknowledged you as a role model, watching you on screen, would have had a huge impact on people.
Oh, I suppose to some degree, yes, it must have, yes. I think even now some of the things, some of the films that come up, you know, that they still show that it must encourage young black actors to get into this profession, if you like. I always felt somehow or other that I was somewhat of an ambassador, if you like, for black people in some. So I felt I had a responsibility not to play any sort of what they would call Uncle Tom parts. You know the phrase Uncle Tom, you know what that means?
Yes.
Yeah.
Are there parts that you turned down that are examples of that?
I can't remember.
Rather not say, no, that's fair enough.
Yeah, it'd be too difficult. But many times my agent would tell me about something. I said, I'm not interested, you know, at that time.
Yeah.
Not my present agent, of course.
Who we should say has been involved in getting you roles in things like Inception, The Interpreter, which is a villainous part. You're the dictator
Right.
who's suspected of war crimes. It was the first film to be shot within the United Nations. It felt like that was a really important role to you to take on, and it was certainly acclaimed.
A very important role.
Why was it important for you?
And one of the things I must say that I liked about that part was being at the United Nations building, and, you know, all the extras were representing all the different countries, you know? And looking out in the audience and seeing all the different, you know, nations there representing the countries and so on. And, you know, I'm a Baha'i, right? And as a Baha'i, I rather feel that the world needs unity, right? It needs the people to come together, all the nations to come together. And being up on that rostrum and thinking, out there, all this, they were extras, but the whole world is represented. And from that little, although I had many other things, but that gave me a thrill. From a Baha'i point of view, I'm talking about.
Yes.
The world needs unity desperately, and I think the only hope for humanity at the moment is the United Nations. Without the United Nations, where can the world go? So, from that point of view, I enjoy the film. Although I played a villain in the film, and I thought, yes, there are many black villains. I'm playing true to life. Nothing wrong about that.
Absolutely.
Honesty, you know. So I enjoyed the part very much.
I know that Sidney Poitier has been a friend. You've been in a film together.
Yeah.
But also that you were encouraged to go to Hollywood. Who said you should have tried to go to Hollywood?
Well, Hollywood. At the time when I would have liked to have gone to Hollywood, I had 4, 5 children as they came along, and I realized that I couldn't have fitted into Hollywood. Sidney Poitier had said to me, we are very good friends, even now. We knew each other right from the beginning of my career. We met and knew each other well. And he said that when he first went to Hollywood, the only black person he saw in the studio beside himself was a shoeshine boy. So I realized that I wouldn't go to America, Hollywood, or any other part of the world without my family. And California, Hollywood, was a very, very prejudiced place at that time.
And this was when are you thinking about? Is this the 1950s, the 1960s?
This would have been mainly, I'd say, in the early 60s, yeah, when I had a family, you know.
And it was partly because you had a family that you were worried about how they would be
Yes,
treated?
because my wife was white,
Yeah.
and my children, well, okay, they're part of me, and they were not white, if you know what I mean. So to have gone to Hollywood and be exposed to this kind of evil that American prejudice stands for, no. I wouldn't stoop to that such a thing. I have to be very honest.
I want to take some questions before we finish from the audience.
Yeah.
So if you've got a question, you have to put your hand up, and we've got a couple of microphones. There's one at the back. Do you need this mic? How did that come about?
Well, I was in Rome at that period. I had my mother passed away in Bermuda. I went to Rome, more or less. Also, things were not happening with me in my career. So I had two reasons to go. One was because I was a bit depressed about that, and I thought a change of scenery wouldn't do me any harm. And also, they were making a lot of films in Rome at the time. So I went to Rome, and I got this part in Torpedo Zone. We went down to La Spezia, and was there for a couple of months. Came back to Rome. Is that the question?
Yeah, no, it was just how you got the part, so you happened to be working there at the time.
Yeah.
Good spot.
A good point. I want to tell you something about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had an agent called Moschino, his name was. And I had left some stills with him, because I'd been in a few films in England at the time. And he put me up for this part. He told me about it, and I phoned him up one day. I said, well, Moschino, what's happening? He said, I'm sorry, Cameron, but the director says you are too sophisticated for this part. I said, what do you mean sophisticated? He says, I don't know. He said, you're too sophisticated, that's all. I said, Moschino, I'm coming to your office. So I went to his office. I said, what's this Moschino? This is a seaman. It's about a seaman, because the ship gets torpedoed, the American ship gets torpedoed, and one of the seamen in the story working on the ship. I said, look, I've been a seaman. You say I'm too sophisticated, it doesn't make any sense. He said, what can I do? He says, you're too sophisticated. I can't do anything about this, the Cameron. I said, where are the steels you sent? He showed me the steel. I said, why did you send this one? From emergency call where I had Siemens fluid. So he said, it's too late now. I said, no, well, Moschino, can I have the address of this director? So he says, okay, you have the address, but don't say I sent you. So I went to the office, I rang the bell. In Rome those days, they were all so courteous, you know. The girl came and said, how do you do? I said, can I speak to Giulio Coletti, please, the director? She said, just a minute. She went in. A man named Brigadier came out. He said, the director said in your picture, he says, you're too sophisticated for this part. I said, please, can I see the director, if you don't mind? He says, okay, but 2 minutes, okay? 2 minutes, no more. I went in, the director, Giulio Coletti. He says, I told your agent you are not right for this part. I'm sorry. I said, please, Signor Giuletti, can I show you something? I put down some stills, one from emergency call. It's, va bene. And I got the part.
I think we've learnt so much from that and just your attitude to getting things done. Have you got a favourite part that you've played out of all the many?
Pardon?
Do you have a favourite role from your career?
Oh, it's got to be Pool of London. Yes, my very first film, I would say.
And is there one you regret not having?
Can't think of them. Well, some of the smaller parts were hardly worth. You know, I've been since. No, I can't think of anything that I've done that I really regretted doing. Maybe I'll think of it after I talk with you. But at the moment, I can't think of it.
Well, I'm hoping you might stay to watch some of Pool of London with us, because I think it'll be quite something to see it with you here. But before we finish, we have a special presentation, which is from Kimberly Durant. She's the UK representative of the Government of Bermuda, and she's going to give you the Screen Nation Hall of Fame Award. So please welcome her on stage.
thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work. Thank you.
This lady.
Right, I'm going to put that down.
I just want to say this dear lady is from my home, Bermuda. And we went to the Bermuda office. It's a tourist office, isn't it?
No, government.
Government office. Yeah. And anyhow, it's a great blessing for me to have you presented.
Thank you.
Thank you. No,
very
it's an honor.
much.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Thank you.
Not at all.
And I just wanted to say thank you for coming. Thank you for that question. And at a time when post-EU referendum, strange questions are being asked about Britishness, this is a fascinating time to watch a film like Pool of London, and remind ourselves of how Britain built itself again after the war and how international it's always been. And most of all, thank you to Earl Cameron CBE for being here to share your memories of making it.
Thank you all for coming.